It's Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. You know what that means. It's time for the Morning Pitt Mailbag. And we've got lots of great questions this week, some things I'm literally looking forward to discuss and talking about. You guys always come through with good questions. I'm excited to jump into those as well. But we have to start off with a little bit of news that came out yesterday. Be remiss to not mention this today. Not going to wait until Monday and do a whole episode about this. We're going to talk about it right now. EJ Borgetti, the longtime sports information director for Pitt's athletic department, a guy who's been around for 28 years in the athletic department. He's been the head of the sports information department for, I don't know, most of those 28 years. He's one of those guys that, despite the fact that he's the sports information department director, it's a behind the scenes job. It's something that, most people on the outside wouldn't be familiar with. I think he's a first name kind of guy for Pitt fans. I mean, if you go to the message boards, people they'll just say EJ, and they're referring to EJ Borgetti. They're referring to the sports information director, and I don't think that's the case at most schools. I don't think it's the case at most schools that, the director of communications or the sports information director, whoever's in charge of that kind of thing, is that well known, that much of a known figure. But EJ is, and for good reason, because he has been dedicated to the cause from the start. He's been an advocate for Pitt. He's been a representative of Pitt, and he is, in a phrase that's gotten thrown around probably more than it should, and it's gotten applied to probably more people than it should. He is a Pitt man, dyed in the blue and gold Pitt man. His father was an All-American at Pitt. EJ went to his first Pitt football game in 1976, and nearly 50 years later, he is still supporting Pitt in every way he can, professionally and personally. Now, burying the lead, EJ's moving out of his role as sports information director into a role as part of a new external relations team, leadership team in the university administration, not athletics, but he's moving to the cathedral, as they say, moving from the Peterson Event Center to the cathedral and becoming, joining Joan Gable's staff there, moving out of athletics and into a role that's probably similar to some of what he did in terms of communications and marketing and strategic planning for the athletic department, but now he's going to be doing that on a university scale. And I mean, first of all the best to EJ, and I think he's the perfect man for this job. On a personal level and a professional level, I'm disappointed to see him go. I think, the people who will be taking over Pitt's athletic department are going to do a great job, but EJ was one of a kind. He's the perfect guy for this job, though, because EJ Borgetti, and I would say this, and this is probably the highest praise I can offer him other than his taste in movies and music, of which, he and I have discussed many times over the last 20 years. But the highest praise I can offer to him, and the reason he's the perfect person for this job, is because when you spoke to EJ Borgetti, when you dealt with him, when you interacted with him, personally or professionally, there was never a question about where his motivations came from or where his loyalty was. It was always Pitt. And, I started covering the team 20 years ago. A lot of you who watch these videos or read Panther-Lair.com have followed Pitt for 20 years or more, or even less. But even if you've only followed Pitt for 10 years or 15 years or 5 years or 20 years or 50 years, you've seen plenty of people roll through here, and their motivation, their commitment, their loyalty was not necessarily to Pitt. There was some loyalty and commitment and motivation and dedication to Pitt, but it wasn't their number one driving motivational factor. There was something else, personal gain, personal aspirations, the resume, whatever it might be. EJ Borgetti is one of a few who I can say unequivocally was motivated by nothing other than the betterment of Pitt. You always knew where he stood. You always knew what the motivations were because it was always driven by the question, what's in Pitt's best interest? And now, as much as ever, Pitt needs people who are driven solely by the question, what is in Pitt's best interest? Pitt Athletics needs that. Pitt, the university, needs that. What is in Pitt's best interest? They need people who are driven by that question more than anything else, and that's what drives EJ Borgetti, and that makes him perfect for this role. This external relations leadership team is being led by Kevin Washoe, a Pitt grad himself, who served previously as the chief of staff for the chancellor. I think he's a great person to lead this team, and he knew right off the bat, I'm sure, that EJ Borgetti was a guy to put on that team. And there's about 6 or 7 others who are joining the leadership team. I don't know about them quite as well, but I mean, they've got the bona fides and they've certainly, put in work at Pitt that it makes sense why they would be, brought into this new group, this new organization, this new external relations team. So we wish happy trails to Pitt, or to EJ Borgetti. All he's doing is going down the hill from the Peterson Event Center down to the Cathedral of Learning. I'm sure we'll see him around here and there, but he won't be a daily fixture around Pitt's athletic facilities, which is disappointing, as I say, on a professional and a personal level. But he's going to be an incredible advocate and ambassador for Pitt in his new role, and I'm sure he won't be able to keep himself away. I don't think he'll keep himself away for too long. I'm sure he'll be around the football and basketball programs for sure. All right. Best of luck to EJ. Best of luck to everyone in this new endeavor. And I'm sure it'll go great. Let's move on to our mailbag, though. It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. You know what we always do? It's the mailbag edition. We take questions from Pitt fans on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We answer as many as we can here on the Friday mailbag. It's always my favorite one to do. I always look forward to doing this. I always say it's great because it's Friday. It's the end of the week. We love that. And we love that it's the mailbag because we can take questions from Pitt fans and answer as many as we can right here in the Morning Pitt Mailbag. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. And go check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network, where we have all the Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfer portal coverage, all those things, plus message boards to hang out with other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are talking about Pitt sports on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. That EJ Borgetti news actually yesterday generated some conversation. That's a testament to EJ's impact. The people on the message boards were talking about him after that news came out. But look, if you're a Pitt fan and there's Pitt news, whether it's new kickoff times or hoops opponents or the SID moving to a different position in the university, the place to go to talk about it is on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. So go check it out, Panther-Lair.com on the 247 Sports Network. Let's jump into the questions here. Richard2928 says, Chris, do you think that, especially in football, the players who transfer from school to school for the bag hurt their development in becoming a better player? I wonder if NFL teams notice this and take this into account when scouting or drafting such players. That's an interesting question. I think a lot of that is going to be on an individual basis, a case-by-case basis of whether a player's development was helped or hurt by transferring and changing schools and moving to new systems. I think there are probably situations where it didn't help. I think of some players. So, I don't want to name names or make this about an individual player, but you think about DeAndre Jules, okay, defensive tackle from Pitt, played transferred last year, transferred to South Carolina for the 2024 season, right? Or maybe he played I think that's what it was. And DeAndre Jules was a guy, he was an upperclassman, a guy who had been around for a while, and finally, in 2023, he really got on the field and made an impact. And it took him about 3 or 4 years to get there. It took him about 3 or 4 years to get into the system and understand the defense and be ready to get on the field and contribute. And he finally gets out there and plays. And then he goes into the transfer portal and goes to South Carolina. And he played at South Carolina. He did a decent job down there. I don't think he was a starter, but he got playing time. It's not like he rode the bench the whole time. But I think in a case like that, if you have a player who it doesn't really click for them for the first 3 or 4 years, is it really in your best interest to start that clock over again? You know what I mean? You finally kind of got it down. You kind of finally understand what's going on in the defense. You know what you're doing. And rather than build on that for your final year of eligibility and maybe really develop yourself into a pro prospect, you take off and go somewhere else and start over. Is that really in your best interest? And maybe it is. And again, this is why it's a case-by-case thing, because maybe there are some guys that it does make sense for, or, conversely, you could have somebody like Jordan Addison. And I'm not saying that, I'm not advocating Jordan Addison transfer, or saying that he made the best decision or whatever like that. But like, you've established yourself. You've established yourself. You won the Biletnikoff Award. You're only intending to play one more year of college football, particularly at that time where NIL deals were still kind of nascent and we weren't really sure how big the dollar amounts could be. You get an opportunity to get a big bag from USC. Go do it. And he still ends up being a first-round draft pick. And so I'm not saying like, oh, yeah, see, Jordan Addison did the right thing. Obviously, you'd like to see players stick with the schools that recruit them and develop them and all of that. But I think guys that maybe take later into their development before it finally clicks, I don't know if it's in your best interest to take off like that. Now, how is it going to affect NFL teams? I don't think they're going to be motivated by it much at all. Like, unless it clearly didn't work, unless it clearly set a guy back. Maybe you have a first round grade on a guy coming out of one season, then he transfers and he doesn't play as well or doesn't click as well, and then you drop the grade on that guy. But I want to say like all but maybe two of the first round quarterbacks that were drafted over the last 2 years were all transfers. So clearly the NFL teams didn't hold that against them. Those guys got drafted. A lot of the other positions tended to be players who were not transfers, at least in the first round. But the quarterbacks, there was no prejudice against those guys. Everybody, the NFL teams were well on board with drafting them, even though they had transferred. So it's really a case-by-case thing. Some players, their development's going to be held back. Some are probably talented enough that they can go anywhere and succeed. And those guys are going to be fine. Other guys are going to need that time and that development to really show what they can do and play themselves into, better draft position or better pro opportunity. Next question. The Insider says, what should the panic rate be on Eli Holstein, a 1 to 10 scale? I know he's coming off surgery, but he looked pretty bad in the spring game, and a fairly reliable poster said he threw a lot of picks in practice. Maybe he's just a gamer because it seemed like he didn't wow in practice last year, but looked good early on in the season in games. I think we said sort of throughout the spring and since spring, like Eli Holstein didn't have the best spring, and there were times where he wasn't the best quarterback in spring camp. For whatever reason, maybe still kind of recovering from the injury. I think some of the reports last year were that spring camp, he was a little banged up during spring camp last year. And so that was maybe why he didn't overtake Nate Yarnell coming out of spring. But by the time they got to August, he was playing like the better quarterback throughout training camp. And so he kind of earned, there were good reviews of Eli Holstein last summer. There weren't great reviews of him this spring. And that's just the reality. And, there were really good reviews of Mason Heinchel. And so this has driven a lot of the conversation that we've had about quarterbacks this offseason, particularly since spring camp, when we've talked about the quarterback situation and talked about how, well, this could be really interesting. Last year you saw Pitt with Nate Yarnell, clearly the QB1. He went to the ACC Media Day and all that stuff. And by the end of training camp, he's not the starter anymore. I'm not saying the exact scenario is going to unfold this year, but it's not unprecedented. And given everything we've sort of heard about these quarterbacks right now, it feels like it could be a possibility. I don't think anything's locked up at that position. I think if the season started tomorrow, Eli Holstein would be the number one quarterback and the starter. But the season doesn't start tomorrow. It starts in late August, right? I think it's the end of August, whenever that Kent State game is. No, not Kent State. Duquesne. Kent State was last year. That's when the season starts. And there's a lot of time between now and then. A lot of football is going to be practiced between now and then. And Eli Holstein can take some steps forward and solidify the job. Or he could, the job could be in jeopardy. I think anything is on the table right now. And including scenarios where one guy starts the season but doesn't finish the season as the starter. I think there's a lot of possibilities out there and a lot of ways that it could go. And so, panic level 5 right now. But the door is open for that panic level to climb, and the door is open for somebody else to win the job. All right, next question. Jay Lazinger says there's a new best of the last 25 years topic today. I posted this on Wednesday. It says it ranked every five-star quarterback, which makes me think, who was Pitt's best five-star recruit? At first thought, I believe it's Jonathan Baldwin. Yeah, Baldwin, I mean, he was really good. He was outstanding in 2009. Big part of why that offense was so good that year. Went on to be a first-round draft pick. NFL career didn't really pan out, but he was pretty great at Pitt. I mean, he had some monster catches against Notre Dame in that 2009 game, if you recall. I might go with Dorian Johnson. Yeah, I mean, I'm still thinking of the old Rivals ratings. I don't know who was a five-star on Scout or 247 or ESPN or the Composite or this or that. The old Rivals ratings, I mean, Pitt really only had a couple of five-stars. Jonathan Baldwin, Dorian Johnson. Was that it? That might have been it. LaShawn McCoy was a five-star at one point. He was a four-star by the time he finished high school, and he was a four-star by the time he got to Pitt out of post-grad. But, if it's Baldwin or Johnson, I mean, Baldwin was pretty awesome for that 1 year. Dorian Johnson was a stalwart, rough start as a true freshman when he had to get out there on the offensive line, but did a really good job as a guard over the next couple of years. So I'd probably say it's one of those two guys. It has to be one of those two guys, right? Your preference on which one will probably depend on, whether you like the big play wide receiver or the good offensive lineman. So that's up to you. But it'll be one of those two guys. Panther Bandy says, after the numerous issues with O-line injuries over the past few seasons, have the strength and training staff done anything to alter their approach going into the season to hopefully lessen the number of issues? It truly seems like even reasonable health at this position could have been worth 2 wins last season. I absolutely see that as the difference between 6-6 or 8-4 this coming season. I'm aware that this may not be knowable at this time. Moore wanted to toss this out as one that I'm interested to hear an answer from Narduzzi on at the opening of camp. I will try to remember that. I think that's a good question. I'd like to, ask Pat Narduzzi that as well. It's tough with injury stuff and the strength staff and what, how the two kind of overlap or intersect. I think there are times where either overtraining or a lack of training can have guys more prone to injury. I don't know if that's always the case, and particularly when you start talking about like offensive line, right? I mean, like that's a position that's just prone to injury. Guys get rolled up on, there's contact, there's collision every single snap. I mean, like there is no break for the offensive linemen. They don't have a snap they can take off. They don't have a snap where they're not banging into someone. And so, when you have that high degree, that high volume of collision and contact and physicality, it's going to happen. You're going to get hurt, and you'd like to minimize it. You'd like to avoid it as much as you can, but the reality is that contact is going to happen. The reality is those injuries are going to happen. The reality is that physicality is just part of it. And so is it something the strength staff can adjust to and accommodate, account for and maybe plan for and try and, help the guys prepare in a way to help, to get them to avoid those injuries? I'm sure they're trying. I'm sure they try something every year, but I think you either just get lucky with injuries on the O-line or you don't. And I think you're right. I think a healthy offensive line last year is probably the difference of a couple more wins. I think a healthy O-line this year can be the difference of a couple more wins. And but even like 2021, right? I mean, they had offensive line injuries that year, and they ended up with like the greatest offense in Pitt history or something. You still had those injuries. So, one, you have to get lucky with the injuries, and two, you have to have the depth and the preparation and development to overcome them when they inevitably happen. Somebody's going to get hurt. Is Pitt deep enough this year to absorb that injury and that absence and move forward and have success? That's a big question, right? Last one here. Smenges says, were Eli Holstein's first 7 games the most impressive first 7 starts ever for a Pitt quarterback? What's the other best 7-game start to a Pitt quarterback's career? Man, you had to ask a question that I didn't really have time to prepare for. Let's just glance back here. Tyler Palco's first 7 games as a starter in 2004. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pitt was 5-2. Let me see. Bill Stahl, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pitt was 6-1 in Bill Stahl's first 7 starts. That was over the course of 2 seasons. The first game of 2007 and the first 6 games of 2008. See who else would be notable here. Nathan Peterman. Pitt went 4-3 in his first starts because he didn't start the Akron game that he ended up winning. Kenny Pickett, first 4 starts. Obviously, the Miami game in 2017, or first 7 starts, I should say. They went 3-4 because they started the 2018 season 2-4. Rod Rutherford, what was his first season as a starter? 2002. So, what? Pitt was like 5-2 that year. I don't know. You'd have to go back pretty far. When was Dan Marino's first year as a starter? Sure, I'm willing to say it was the most impressive first 7 starts ever for a Pitt quarterback. I mean, he threw, 300 yards and 3 touchdowns each of the first 5 games. He won at Carolina, which Pitt hasn't done forever and a day. Obviously, the 7-0 start, the first, undefeated record in non-conference play ever in Pitt history, right? Sure. If somebody else wants to come up with another start, and I think there's some longtime Pitt fans, some old heads who want to come through with a throwback, to John Kajemi or somebody like that, let me hear it. You can go in the comments or on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and tell us a guy who had a better 7-game start to his career. For now, we're going to go with Eli Holstein going 7-0 in his first 7 starts, and as well as he played in those games, I think we can make a good case. And if that's not the best, 7-game start for a Pitt quarterback, it'll do until we get a better answer. So let's see what people can come up with an answer to that question. All right, that's some great stuff this week. I appreciate you guys coming through with all the questions. Again, happy trails to EJ Borgetti as he moves on from the Pitt Athletic Department to the University of Pittsburgh as a whole. You can talk about that on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. You can talk about the best 7-game start for a Pitt quarterback on Panther-Lair.com. You can talk about all these things on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you never miss any of our Pitt video content. And I think that's about it. We'll have another mailbag next Friday, and of course, we'll be back on Monday for another Morning Pitt, just talking about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. So like and subscribe, head over and check out Panther-Lair.com. Enjoy your week. Thanks for watching the video today. Have a great weekend, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.